Polk's actions to resolve the Oregon dispute were the largest diplomatic struggle of his presidency. For several years, the United States had had a joint occupancy agreement with the United Kingdom for the substantial but relatively unsettled piece of land stretching along the Pacific Ocean from the Mexican border in present-day California to the Russian border in what would eventually become the state of Alaska. Polk had run on a platform endorsing the annexation of this entire territory, but personally only promised to resolve the issue. The phrase manifest destiny had first been coined as the rationale for this objective. However, the cries for Oregon's complete annexation were the loudest in the northern states, where many claimed that Polk would annex Texas as a southern slave state, but would let the British have all or most of the northern territory that would be destined to become a free state. Polk, on the issue, toed the party line in his inaugural address. He stated that the U.S. claim to the territory was clear and unquestionable. He promised the American people that he would take all of Oregon and rejected offers from London of negotiation. He was staunchly against arbitration by a third party. Polk knew that Britain was no longer profiting off the region's fur resources and needed American wheat to keep its people fed. He hoped the British would concede, a hope shared by his Secretary of State, the future President James Buchanan. The government of Prime Minister Robert Peel in Britain would call his bluff. He sent a reinforced British squadron to the Oregon region and informed the American ambassador that if war came, he had 30 ships of the line that could be immediately deployed to attack the American Atlantic coast. Still, the slogan 54-40 or fight, 54-40 was the longitude of the Oregon's territory northern and southern borders, was spread throughout the country by Democratic Party newspapers. Polk ultimately decided to ignore the voices of the most radical in his own party, a group of expansionist Democratic senators from the American Northwest, who had called for war instead of any compromise. Polk knew that a war with the world's most powerful empire was not in America's interests. He eventually agreed to essentially the same terms offered to his predecessor, John Tyler, terms his party had criticized Tyler for even considering. The Oregon Territory would be split at the 49th parallel. The United States would gain almost twice as much territory, but the British would keep full control over their trade posts in the Vancouver area. The Senate would ratify the treaty. The Oregon Treaty, however, had some holes, and there would continue to be border disputes until a German arbitration led to the Treaty of Washington in 1871. Historians often criticize Polk for his initial failure to open negotiations with London, a mistake that led America to the brink of war. Present-day Polk supporters cite this issue as one where Polk was willing to make an unpopular decision for the good of the nation. And Polk critics point to this as an instance where Polk failed to fulfill his campaign promises. His reputation as a president who fulfilled these campaign promises, however, remains relatively intact, as this issue is often forgotten. The tariff rate was perhaps the most important economic issue of the age. At the time, tariffs were the primary source of revenue for the federal government. In 1842, the Whigs had enacted what the Democrats called the Black Tariff, effectively raising the tax on all imports to 32%. The Whigs had defended the move as a necessary response to Britain's corn laws that raised tariffs on American industrial goods and hurt the economy of the American Northeast. The Democrats, whose constituents were less involved in the industry, bemoaned the tariffs as the death of free trade that had soured their relations with their British cousins while increasing prices on many imported goods. Polk agreed with the majority of the Southerners. He directed his Secretary of the Treasury, Robert Walker, to determine the specific details of the plan. Walker's plan reduced tariff rates to 25% on almost all goods. Tariffs on certain luxury goods like tobacco and alcoholic spirits, products of the American South, would be taxed at the same rate. Polk presented the Walker Plan before Congress. He promised the plan would promote trade to the extent that over time it would increase revenue. Southern Democrats applauded the new plan and presented it before Congress for a vote. The Democratic-dominated Congress voted yea, and the Walker Tariff became law in 1846. Polk's assessment that revenue over time would increase would eventually prove correct. Revenue would increase from $30 million in 1845 to $45 million in 1850. Many historians, however, point to Britain's repeal of the Corn Laws as an equal or not more important reason of increased Atlantic trade. The Walker Tariff would be replaced by the substantially higher Morrill Tariff signed into law by Abraham Lincoln in 1861.